Welcome to Parentless Podcast. Please note that in this show, you may hear graphic descriptions or language that may not be appropriate for everyone. Listener discretion advised.
I am a stand-up comic. I'm also a scientist in the day. I usually do genetics and clinical testing, so I would be super useful if I was working right now, but I'm not. So there's that. And I actually have two sets of dead parents. So I'm double Batman, as my teenager likes to call me and has since he was little. One set died when my biological parents died when I was an infant, and we can get into all of that as well. And then I was raised by my maternal grandparents who also passed away years ago. So I'm double parentless.
This is a fact production of SETI.
That makes me sad comes and goes by. Could wrote the book of Joe instead. Oh, to go now. Heavy eyes, so help me make this bed over and over. Tell me what it takes to make you stay.
Hello. Welcome to Parentless. Thank you, Amber Webster. How are you?
Not too bad. How are you?
I'm good. We've had a day, so I'm glad it's the evening time.
It felt on topic that I'm going through stuff from 2013 that's my old junk, but also my mom's old junk. I've gone through it before several times. She was kind of a pack rat. So when she died, it's the books, the jewelry, the stuff where you're no, we just keep all of that. And now I'm just finally decluttering because we're all stuck inside being why did she keep all of this? That'll be my biggest message is before you die, clean up your crap so your kids don't have to deal with it.
How old are you? You mind?
Oh, I am 41, almost 42.
41. And how many kids do you have?
I have 3 kids. My oldest is, and I have to think about it for a moment, 22. My next oldest is 20, and my youngest is 14. And 2 oldest have moved out and have their own places, significant others, all of that.
What kind of science do you do?
I have a degree in biochemistry and one in microbiology. I actually have an associate's in criminal psych as well, but that's irrelevant. I did my undergrad focus on immunology and immune function and vaccinology and wound up landing in molecular biotechnology, which is basically just a fancy way of saying that anytime you need a genetic test or if you're testing genetically for anything. And the differentiation being if you had a clinical ailment that was genetic, I could look for that, or to type a type of cancer or leukemia based off of your genes and what might be affecting you. The other end would be COVID testing, something where we're still looking at DNA, RNA, but usually bacterial, viral, just kind of trying to ID stuff since it's actually just a lot better than plating and growing microbes to just look at their genetics and know if you got it or not.
That's awesome.
Take stuff that takes a week down to a day.
I'm just super interested. So I have 1 degree. It's an associate's degree. So it's cool. No, it's cool. They say you don't need to have a degree these days. So I just really admire anybody who's gone forth and done something with their life. So and I want to talk, don't let me forget, but I want to talk about how, what we're about to talk about has really played into you becoming who you are today with your degrees as well.
Yeah. You and I briefly talked before, just kind of about my parents dying when I was younger. And as an infant, I was actually in the house and in the room. And my biological parents had a domestic violence relationship. They'd actually been divorced and got remarried, which not a good call. And my father killed my mother in front of me. And it was about a month later when he knew he was probably going down for that crime because some reason in the 70s they let him run around for a month just to work that out when it was real obvious.
Oh, so they already knew. They knew that it was him and he was just out and about.
He was cleaning the gun in the living room when the police showed up for a suicide by that gun. Right away with a domestic violence background, you're I don't know. I don't know that he walked in and just decided to clean the gun that she killed herself with immediately after her suicide.
Right.
is not usually what we do or think. We're not like, you know what I should do? I should clean that for the cops to get here. Totally. So he wound up overdosing, I assume on barbiturates since it worked. And most ODs don't. It was about a month after that. But I feel like that really drove, because a lot of my education kind of came from this, because my original goal was actually to be a forensics pathologist. And I was very interested in bringing justice for families, because when my father killed himself, like, it was left open. So my mother's murder was never listed as a murder or suicide. Even her death certificate's still in between, because they can't try him. He's dead. But they can't prove it, so they can't really land on an answer, and it stayed that way for 40 years. And it created a lot of more turmoil, I'd say, for my maternal grandmother and my aunts and uncles than it did for me necessarily, but just knowing how much closure that would have brought my family, I think kind of drove me towards that. And then I got diagnosed with Parkinson's, and I decided that med school probably wasn't the way to go.
Whoa.
Not with a shaky hand.
throwing some bombs down here, are you? I didn't know that.
While I'm not too bad as far as shakiness, I just felt like it was ethically irresponsible to go into med school and have to learn how to do IVs and spinal taps and hope that I could just write it out for 4 years.
How old were you when you were diagnosed?
It was probably about 4 years ago. It was a year or two before I started comedy, so 4 or 5 years ago. I graduated, since I went back to school, in 2013, and it was a few years after that where I was like, you know what? Yeah, probably stick with clinical medicine, but not doctor. I have considered doing, like, do I try for a PA where I might not be obligated to, but
yeah,
I could always do mortuary science and not have to worry at all.
There was not that this is on exactly the same level, but there was a job at a funeral home open. And so I came in here to Derek. I was like, can I work at a funeral home? And he's like, yeah, that's fine. But when I started looking at like the reviews from the old employees, it seemed like it was more like a sales job. And the position said nothing about a sales job. And they're like, no, you got to have like a padded bank account to even start, because you don't even make money in like the first 3 months. And so like, that's not what I'd be into.
Yeah, I thought about doing, because one of my friends did, I think Mesa Community College has a mortuary science program that is like the embalming process and reconstruction, but they also go through like just the funeral director and business ends portion. But it seems like you can kind of wind up on either end of that coin, depending on where you get hired, where some end, it might be more just greeting people and selling them a funeral package. And on the other end, you might actually be embalming. Yeah. So that would be where I'd go. I used to do FX makeup, so I'm like, I could probably rebuild some stuff. I've messed enough stuff up.
Right.
It's gonna be kind of the same.
I don't think I'd go for embalming though. That wouldn't be it. So let me, because we can get like super far off track. I'm really good at that. But I would like to, I know when you were giving me some details in Messenger, you kind of said that and here too, you said that you actually witnessed your dad kill your mom. And you were how old?
I was about a year. My sister was 3. And so she heard everything and remembers it in great detail. I witnessed it because I was in a crib in the room. But all I recall is my mom on the bed and like blood everywhere. So I'm guessing I came online like the moment that gun went bang. And all I remembered was just that flashes of afterwards, which I know a lot of people are like, how could a 1-year-old remember that? The reason I kind of feel like I can back that up is my maternal grandmother who raised me when I was little, and this is before like kindergarten. When I'd asked how my parents died, she said they died in an accident, and I couldn't figure out how my dad also accidentally shot himself. Because I knew they were both dead, but when they said accident, I immediately thought gun death. Like my child brain basically decided that my father or someone had shoved the gun in between the 2 mattresses, like just hiding it. My mom was going to make the bed and accidentally pulled the trigger, and that's what I saw. So I could make it work that it was an accident and what I saw and remembered. So it wasn't until much later, because I'd still sit there as a kid going like, okay, but how did my dad die? Like, why wouldn't he help her and try to make the bed as well? Or like, how did two people accidentally shoot themselves? Wasn't until like a bit later, I'd say my maternal grandmother told me what happened more realistically when I was about 9. But by then the town had more than let me know by letting their kids know. And I found out through other kids because I was the death house girl.
So you're going to school. How big was your town?
Like trying to guess, I don't know population wise, but it's kind of a Mayberry-esque town, but it's right outside of Denver. So it's right next to a big metropolis city, but it's kind of cut off by a few little mountains.
Okay, so you go to school and then you start hearing kids talk. Do they talk about you? Do they talk to your face? Like, how are you hearing these things?
I'm not going to lie. I got a lot of weird reacts or like kids who avoided me just because I think their parents are like, oh, that's that one girl. And because it was a small enough town where everyone kind of knew each other. Then I can't think of any specific things where kids came out and did it. But like my childhood best friend, Mark, he and I had our moments. And I remember his dad getting arrested after a school play in like kindergarten. So at one point, I got mad and yelled something about how his dad was on America's Most Wanted because this is elementary school fighting. And he yelled something at me about my parents. I was like, oh, shit, is he just making that up or is that real? And our families had been friends. So I'm pretty sure he's one of the first who told me, and it was in a fight. And he just yelled, well, your dad did this. And I'm like, what? No. And then I go complain to my older sister who kind of at a certain point knew. And she's like, oh, yeah, that totally happened. But yeah, I always thought it was kind of stupid that they didn't. I get like maybe not at 3, 4, 5 telling me the truth, but like a kid like version of it, maybe a softened down one at least probably would have been better living in the same town since everyone else knew but me.
Wow. So then when you were 9 years old,
I think I finally went and was like, look, half the town's told me, Mom, like, spill. Like, what's the reality here? And she finally did kind of go through. And it was odd because I don't know that to this day I know that much about my biological mother and father. Like, no one in my household growing up wanted to talk about them ever. Ever. It was just unspoken. I don't know anything about my father except for like that he was a horrible and evil man per my maternal mother or grandmother, of course. Understandably, her daughter was murdered. I think she kind of in some ways raised me like I was my father's child more than her daughter, though. She was not great, but I think a lot of that was her difficulty and unwillingness to get close to another child. I think after that, I think losing a kid really just made her arm's length to every one of us after that. Which I can also kind of get. Just, I don't know. I spent decades after her death just going back and forth between being really mad at her and like being like, but she had her problems and traumas, and then being really mad at her just because I don't really know much about them. Like my mother was always an angel. My father was always Hitler, basically. And that's it. Like not even favorite colors or I found out stuff about him just through old property sometimes.
Wow. Yeah. I was going to say, like, is there people left like in your town that knew them?
I kind of looked around and looked, but like never could pinpoint any one specific person who hung out with them. And like my uncle said, like, if I wanted to call and ask him, I'm like, can I pick your brain about my mother at least? And he said yes. But anytime I've kind of tried to do that, everyone wants to like protect her graven image as this holy, perfect, died young. Because she was only 21 when she died. So it's been weird to outlive her and then see my kids outlive her.
Wow.
But yeah, like, but that's not the part I want. I like when I find out stories where she got in trouble or like I found out a story where she picked up a crayon. A cigar box full of crayons in a fight with another family member. And as a kid, like knocked her across the face. And I'm like, now I feel like we can relate. Like I understand where I came from now. And it makes sense. This angel, perfect, never did anything wrong. I couldn't figure out where I came from.
Right. So that's how you knew there had to be another side to the story. Cause you're like, that's not me.
Yeah. At some point, one of my family members just like rediscovered me on Facebook and was like, said something about me being a comedian. He's like, oh yeah, you get that being funny from your mother. And I was like this huge thing. I went and wrote an essay because I didn't know my mom was funny. I had no idea. And I'm like, oh, okay, now I get it. Like, but it's hard to relate. And I think that's a tricky thing is if you don't know enough about your parents, you feel like you can't relate to them at all.
Right. And kind of lost and just where do I belong? Where did I come from? Why am I me?
Yeah. I mean, there's definitely a decent amount of that. I mean, on the other end, I'm like, whatever, I'm free, do whatever I want. Like, I'm also free of a lot of those parental obligations, I guess, where you have to live up to something. Or I've never done well with that one, though, regardless. So,
so your grandmother raised you and grandfather. So who was and you call them mom and dad?
I do. Right? That's okay. So confusing. I've been trying to make sure I don't hear.
Well, that's how I'm going to start referring to them now because we're going to move on to that part. So did your dad die first?
He did. My mother had Lewy body dementia. And my father, basically, he had been diagnosed probably like 15 years before that with prostate cancer, but it was caught early. And he was getting chemo injections, basically, where he just get a shot in the butt once a month and was fine. What I would guess what happened with him, because he had labs like in October, November of 2012 that looked great. Nothing looked wrong at all. And it was like March that he was like within a month, not even a month, he was gone. Like he went to the hospital and he just never came back out, went directly to hospice, and within a week or two it's gone. And he had like extreme cancer throughout his abdominal cavity. And my guess is he was so busy kind of trying to keep my mom, who was getting worse and worse dementia, at home and manage a lot of stuff that he never managed. She handled bills and budgets and all of that. And I think just by virtue of trying to do all of that and cook and clean and keep her from like burning the house down, it was so much that he was skipping his chemo. And it fought back big time. And it was about a month after that she died just from the dementia. It would flare up and she'd be completely gone and would think I was a high school friend. And then she'd come back and completely remember everything, depending on how good she was feeling, how tired she was, if she had any infections. So they were pretty close together, like a month or so apart, if even. There's a number of things around his death that make sure I keep track of my headspace. One of the things that was interesting, that I don't regret, was that my father and mother both kind of were cremate me, throw me away, and we did wind up embalming my father. We still wound up doing a cremation, but we basically got the casket that looks like wood, looks nice, but it's the Walmart version where it's like pressed cardboard. Which I'm going to say, if you want to do a viewing before a cremation, can't recommend enough.
So I'm kind of new. I'm kind of new to the cremation talk, but someone did tell me that you can rent a casket, which I didn't realize. And so now there's a cheap version that you can buy.
There is literally like the pop together TV stand that you got when you were probably 20 something from Walmart version of a casket that is all cardboard, looks like wood. So it looks like you shelled out the bucks, and nice if you're having a service, but the whole thing is just a big cardboard cremation container.
Oh.
If you don't purchase one, you purchase a very cheap, like $20 cardboard cremation container, which is the refrigerator box of them. But the reason that we wound up doing the embalming before the cremation was just because a lot of people from our family, like once they knew my father wasn't doing that well, some of the family were able to make it down and others weren't. But I feel like everyone kind of who was out of town benefited from having just that one last opportunity to kind of sit and talk and see their father and mentally kind of just, I don't know. For me, it bothers me if I can't see the body at all of someone very close, because I have this major disconnect that they're gone until I do. But once I do, I'm like, nope, yep, makes sense. And I can move on faster. So we did that basically just so other people from out of town could kind of have that option to have a bit. And that also gave them a chance to kind of fly down and say their goodbyes to my mother. So we did not do that for hers. We basically did just a cremation and a small service. It was really strange for me is just, I'm pretty well versed on a lot of death ritual throughout the world. I attribute all of this, a lot of people who are into oddities and forensics and all the weird cultural stuff around death usually had a trauma like mine in their youth, and that made them like just more touchy-feely and wanting to get really close and personal with death and death practices to kind of, I think, demystify some of the stuff as kids that we couldn't do or couldn't come to terms with. And it's really weird for me that I saw my dad in makeup, basically, and lipstick, because that's our normal funerary embalming practice here, is to paint people in makeup so they don't look dead when they're dead, as opposed to almost every other country in the world who doesn't embalm. Other countries, when I pointed that out and go like, I saw my dad in lipstick, it was weird. And they're like, why don't you just put him in the ground? Like, this is so strange to us. That you literally make wax sculptures of your people and then make up them, and all these practices that just you don't really think about because they're so normal.
Okay, question. If other countries don't embalm people and they don't do the makeup, so then do they not, they obviously can't then have like the open casket service like we have.
Well, they can. They're just squigged by the signs of decay, which I don't think most people realize. Like, it takes like unless it's some crazy conditions, like at least a week before anyone gets really frightening, unless it's like a damp or moist environment or like really humid. For the most part, lip color changes and like your cheeks and stuff lose tone and kind of sink in, and your eyes sink in because your eyes tend to lose moisture and tone. Besides just kind of looking a little more shriveled and maybe like areas that are bright pink, like lips and eyelids and stuff like that, tend to take on darker hues from gray all the way to black. There's really not a lot of outward decay, and bodies are pretty safe. Like, I'm a microbiologist. The only thing on most bodies that would bother you is the same stuff that would bother you if they were alive. Like, so they're really not dangerous unless someone had Ebola, or if they have a bloodborne pathogen, you wouldn't want a needle stick back and forth or to spread blood around. But other than that, most other countries just kind of pine box it, or they'll have stuff that like 3 or 4 days of staying at home with the body, and they bathe the person and put them on ice and hang out, and people come and visit, and then they bury them directly. All the way down to certain countries in South America where grandpa just stays in a bedroom and he just stays there forever. Like, kids sleep next to his body. And wow. There's a lot of interesting when you get into various other cultures throughout the world.
We'll be right back.
If you like what you've heard so far, tell me about it by sharing the show with your friends, leaving a review, or sharing your story with me. Contact me on Facebook and Instagram at Parentless Podcast, email at parentlesspodcast@gmail.com, or if you'd like to remain anonymous, leave a voicemail at 623-396-6069. Find the show wherever you listen to podcasts. I
did witness cremation for both, which I think like a lot of people aren't familiar with that. I found out about it at first through the show 6 Feet Under. And then I found out about it because I interned for about a year with a forensics pathologist. So I helped with a lot of autopsies, and I got to see the back room of a lot of funeral homes and a lot of embalmings, which is really weird because people go gray to pink while you're standing there. It's strange. Witness cremation is just basically where you can push the button on the cremation machine to start the flames, which for doing cremation, it's pretty hands off. And I don't know, for me, it's a big deal to kind of participate in the care of the people I love who died. And that's like one thing that I like doing, where you can hang out and just kind of have a solemn moment. They really don't care. What I didn't expect is I expected to walk in like with the cremation machine and have to go push an industrial button on a big industrial machine. Totally wasn't the case. It's actually so much more common than people realize, that it gets asked for by certain cultures who prefer it. I think a lot of Buddhists do witness cremation. The funeral home actually had like the cremation machine in one room, and then a room built off of it with windows where you could see the machine. You could see the person being loaded into the machine, and they'd even wheel them by the window so you could one more time to mom or dad. But the button was on that side of the wall. So once they got them in, they were like, okay, now if you want to go for it, step forward and push the button, because then the machine tends to run for several hours. But they're like, you can hang out for the whole thing. But it was separate in a separate room with glass windows, button on the other side. So you really didn't have to get like really into this quickie stuff. I thought that was kind of cool that there's a lot of places have it kind of built for that, though that's an option if people are wanting to like light the flame that sets the pyre of their loved one alight. Just ask. They probably are prepared for it.
And it's called a witness cremation?
Correct. Yeah, you're just that. You can watch or push the button. You don't really see anything but the side of the machine and the temperature thing go up and down.
Oh.
But some customs like have prayer through that whole time, where the whole time the cremation's happening that they'll do prayer or wailing or other things to show respect and love. Sometimes they'll fill a room full of people and hire people to roll around and cry and moan and all of that. Just depends on the custom.
So what did you do? You pressed the button and then what?
And had like a moment. And then I got into a conversation with the funeral director, who actually was really cool. And we discussed life, death, evolution, intelligent design. We just went into a whole philosophical conversation for a while, and we're still good friends. But it just became he and I kind of just talking about life and death. And I thought that was kind of nice. I'm sure it was a nice break for him, just chit-chatting versus sales all day, right?
After your dad passed away and you pressed the button, you had just about a month more with your mom.
Correct. At that point, she was basically in assisted living and just kind of in decline, and did kind of similar. She just basically, it was the dementia had kind of gotten to the point where it took her, and we wound up just doing the cremation since everyone had just been down to see for my father's funeral, where family all came back down. But at that point, I think everyone, it was just kind of that one last seeing them had kind of been able to prepare for mom. They knew they wouldn't be back until her funeral, if that makes sense. They just didn't realize it'd be a month later. They should have just hung out. And then we just did kind of a small service for her, just since we kind of did a, similar amount thrown in. We just didn't do a body there, I guess, is the only difference. Which is still weird for me. That one was a little more interesting from my end, because the witness cremation, she wasn't embalmed. And it was just myself and my niece, I think, came and hung out for a few when I did the witness cremation of my father. But no one else was interested. And then by the time it was witness cremation for my mother, a few more of my family members were actually interested in doing the witness cremation. And I kind of tried to prepare them that without embalming, it had, and she'd been dead for several days and probably in a freezer. And it looked like the funeral home had done something to close her mouth, and she had like some deep furrows where you could tell she was dead and kind of Muppet mouth. So I felt like that was something I don't know if like my brother was quite prepared for, because they did ask if we wanted to see her one more time. But when they pushed her past, we're like, oh, yeah, she's dead. She's hard if you have not prepared for that. So that might be something too, if you want to do a witness cremation, but you're really worried about seeing someone that you care about with those many outward signs of death. Pass on the viewing. Just rest assured that they did confirm that was your loved one in the box, and don't look at who they are before, if that will bother you. I know my parents were worried that if I saw them like that that would be the first image that popped in my head of them every time. I think I'm weird enough and have seen enough that it isn't. So I hope that they are content, if they have any kind of consciousness out there, that it's not what I think of when I think of them.
All right. Well, now that's where we have to go, since you mentioned it. Tell me, what are your, not necessarily your religious views, but like you said, do you obviously are not sure if they're looking down on you or what they're doing now. So tell me your views on there.
I kind of dance back and forth, and I consider myself a Spinozist, which is more of philosophy, and I am a philosophical Buddhist. So I don't really know. I feel like anything that would have created us may exist, could exist, but anything smart enough to do it, how in the world would my feeble little human brain even conceive of something at that notion's intellect? It'd be so beyond ours that I just try not to overthink it. And I go, I guess I lean agnostic. It doesn't feel quite right, but going, I really just don't know. And most stuff I tend to lean more scientific. But, I don't know. I feel like they may be out there. They may be able to watch down on me. I have had weird moments of that because, like I said, grandma, not the best all the time. She had me pretty convinced, and I only realized like a few years ago that she couldn't see everything anymore. But like, I wouldn't even say bad stuff out loud about her, like under some locked in childlike notion that she could still hear every fucking thing I said from above. And I don't know if it was all the, your mother's watching down on you. Oh, your grandpa. So like, once she died, it was like, I couldn't say shit. She's watching me. Like I couldn't say a bad word about her for years. And I didn't realize my grandmother basically had convinced me that she's Jesus watching me on high and judging everything I do. And I still spend time shaking that while simultaneously not even knowing if I believe in anything like that. Just the knowledge that if she did hear me, how'd she feel? And I'm like, oh God, I'm living under her guilt still. Like,
right.
So that was a weird one for me. I'm like, I think my mom like is scolding me from above, but also, I don't really know about that. Like, I've had just enough weird moments where I've seen weird stuff that I can't discount it completely. But I'm like, I also could have lost my mind for a few, so I can't discount that either.
What have you seen? I have to know.
Okay. The weirdest and most strange is my biological mother and father are in an urn, even though they were both cremated, in Colorado at a place called the Tower of Memory, which is inside a giant cemetery named Crown Hill, popular amongst the country for cemeteries. This one has a big, white, beautiful, like church tower mausoleum thing. And there was a point where, like, I tend to, since I never knew my biological mother, like, I was used to talking to the box of ashes because that was something we'd go visit my mother. And then, I get it where hey, mom, whatever. So that pretty normalized for me at times when I was still living in Colorado to drive past that cemetery and go, you know what, I'll swing in and visit the ashes today. And there was a point that after my oldest was born where I don't even remember where I was going, but I had her as an infant in the back seat, in her car seat, and was like, I'll swing by. And I have to see if I can remember all the details. So like, I don't even know if I wanted to swing by so much as it was, I think I was driving that way and either I wasn't thinking about it or I had a blackout moment, but I wound up there either way, and decided I was going to go visit real quick. And maybe I'd bring my daughter in and introduce my daughter to the box of ashes, and like went to get out of the car. And my daughter was like really, really happy for a baby. She was cooing and laughing and going kind of nuts. And I went up to the door and it was locked. So they sometimes would be open closed for that tower portion of the cemetery. That day it was closed. They must have been renovating or something like that. So got ready to leave and she started screaming when we went to get back into the car. It's like she'd look off into the distance like cats looking at, and you're like, what are you looking at? So I'm going, I don't know, maybe this is something to do with my mother saying hello to her granddaughter. Trying to put that child back in the car. She was screaming, crying, fussing, couldn't get her console. Was like, oh, well, let's head home. And as I was driving away, I heard her start laughing and giggling and stuff again. And I was like, what? And I look in the rear view mirror, and my rear view mirror looked like a Jesus poster of like just light and wings throughout, like just moving, flapping white wing stuff and beautiful light. And I jerked my head around to look and it was gone. And that was going like, did I just catch a lot of sunlight and it tripped me out, or did I see that? And then after that, my daughter was just kind of quiet. So I've always just kind of went, I don't know, maybe it was grandma. Maybe grandma said hi. So I have those moments, and I'm like, I think it's just for me, the more I've tried to delve into them and solve them, I don't know that you can. You either believe or you don't believe. Or you're just kind of like, I don't know. I don't have enough evidence really either way. And for me, if I'm not 100% sure, I'd rather be in the middle and waiting to figure that out based off of what new data I get. Or what makes me happy. Like, because when all else fails, if it makes you happy, believe it. And if anyone asks why, I say, because it makes me happy.
That's good. I like it.
As a scientist for a long time, I believed in an afterlife. And people would ask me why as a scientist. I'm like, because it makes me happy. Like, it just, I don't have to deal with the existential dread. Like, but yeah, there's no better reason than that. I kind of got over that, and the wonder of science like overtook me for death, where I think it's neat because we no matter what, we wind up in a million pieces all over the place, being breathed and used in parts of plants and part of nature. And it's all kind of magical to me, I guess, now.
So with your parents being cremated, did you have the ashes? Did you spread them somewhere? What did you do with those?
Basically, I did not keep any of the ashes. I know for me, like if they ever moved my biological parents, I'd want some of their ashes just because I've only ever really known them as a box of ashes. But with living people, I'm not huge on keeping ashes. My siblings did, but it just kind of depended. Some of my siblings wanted some didn't. And we basically went to our hometown in Colorado and scattered them off of Lookout Mountain across the city where they spent most of their lives, and we're really happy. So they got a beautiful Colorado scattering into the forest and throughout over everyone's houses in town, depending on which way the wind blew. And my father had always wanted to go to Buffalo, and my husband's from Buffalo, and he wanted to visit Niagara Falls. So at one point when he had to fly up there to check in with the Seneca Nation, he took some of my father's ashes up and scattered them into the falls because he always wanted to visit. So yeah, then he got to kind of in a post-mortem way. If there's any connection, we figure give him that option.
Good. That's a beautiful place. It must feel good to help somebody, get to somewhere that they never got to go.
I'm like, no matter what at the end, I still just kind of like that notion. It's just something about the additional care and love too. Or if you do get to partly be there, amazing. Scatter me everywhere.
Yeah. Are you going to get cremated?
I am not opposed to cremation. I am pretty into the pine box in the ground or just toss me in the woods and like circle of life it. I am okay being donated to science. I don't care if the laws change and my daughter wants to keep my entire skeleton on a throne, which she has said she wants. I feel like her girlfriend gets a vote. It's just a little weird having your mom's skeleton on a throne in your house. Like, she might change her mind on that one. I'm fine with any whatever happens to my body. Body world's cool with that. I'm fine with cannibalism. Eat my meat. It's meat. All that.
All right. Well, it's on record now. So
I have Hannibal Lecter on my shoulder. So yeah. So I don't know. I don't have a whole lot of reverence around my body. Like, I feel, I don't know, like it's just something I inhabited for a while. Mm-hmm. As opposed to who I am. There's some kind of injectable or filler. I don't remember which one it is. Research your fillers if you get fillers. There's one that is where they basically break down cadaver skin to get all of the stuff that they put into the filler. I'm all fine with that. If you want to melt me and inject me into rich women's faces, I'm great with it. So long as they're great with it. Like,
you are just full of information. Thank you. Good thing I'm never going to get filler, so we're good to go.
Yeah, right? I'm like, yeah, pass.
So you do comedy, and you were a part of the Bro Show. How did you get into comedy?
I actually think this one is one that came from my maternal grandmother, I think. When we were little, she never played music in the car. She would play Bill Cosby tapes. I don't recall her actually playing any other comedian but Cosby, but he was fairly squeaky clean back then as far as his jokes. You don't realize how clean his material is. And there was like a whole movement in the 80s and 90s of like Cosby knew how to parent your children. Like, irony now, right? Mm-hmm. Maybe he just sedated all those kids. I don't know. Probably. But the man was an amazing comic. And I think a lot of that, like, honestly, I feel like it's a lot of the influence came from my maternal grandmother. She loved cop shows. And when I was younger, I was a cop. I did that briefly because I was like, oh, I can do this associates real quick, do this job that'll help me pay for more school. And that had a long about face where I wound up going back to school. Not from that I left unpleasantly from police experience, but I feel like it was a lot of the TV cop drama stuff was also probably a factor of me wanting to do investigative and police stuff. But the comedy stuff was something that was always kind of there, and we did a lot together as a family. And I look at stuff now that other people attribute to me being a comic, like running around writing improv parody songs on the fly all the time, or singing weird stuff to the cat. That was just completely normal growing up with, like, my dad had rude songs that he wrote about my piano instructor just randomly because it worked with what he was singing, or he'd redo songs all the time. So I feel like I got a decent chunk of that kind of coming from them, but I've always just kind of didn't realize I'd commented about it, said something about it, had it play in my life in one way or another for all of my life. And I kept going, I should do an open mic. I should write some stuff. And eventually my husband kind of gave me a kick in the ass about let's go do it, and went and did it with me, and game over since then. I wound up running the mic that I literally did my first mic on until the place closed, and have been doing it for 3 years. So I think it was just kind of chasing one of those childhood passions and things that was just always such a big part of my life as well. It's either been cop stuff or comedy stuff. So kind of both now.
Yeah, I wouldn't have figured you for a cop there. So I'm glad you threw that in.
I did that and worked corrections for a while, and it led to a bunch of stuff that there's a non-disclosure around, but I was a whistleblower.
Oh.
So that changed
right.
things for me. I got blackballed, but I got enough money to go back to school.
Hey, that's why you got the job, right? You wanted to go to school, so.
It worked out, really. And I'm too rebellious and to be a cop. Like, I was way over the top in some of the stuff, but I should add to that because that could be so much worse than I'm talking. An example was having someone in the prison hand me back an orange and say, I can't eat this. Can I get another orange? And the whole thing was covered in mold, like through and through blue. And I'm like, yeah. And I was pretty appalled that someone attempted to serve it. So I wrote a report about how the food quality was becoming cruel and unusual. And I stapled the orange in the bag, the moldy one, to the report and threw it on the lieutenant's desk. So probably was more like a TV cop than a real cop. Like in some of that's a pretty ballsy move.
I want to know about so do you feel like your experiences in life or your parents' death, not really, it sounds like more their life, and that's kind of what led you to the comedy?
I think in part, like, one, you don't find comics who aren't kind of a mess of trauma or have a wild childhood. But I think that there is just kind of a certain point where it's the laugh or cry. And right. The people who just full Joker level go into the laugh become comics. And it's usually from like a lot of really grim stuff. It's just all the trauma. I'm like, like you can't sweat the small stuff. And I laugh about most things now because I face some pretty horrific shit.
So yeah, I think that's just something that comes from the trauma and just that's one of our coping skills. Would you say that comedy is a coping skill for you?
It definitely is. It becomes therapy, I think, for even most comics. Like you get people who've been doing it a long time be like, make sure you're not just doing all therapy, because a lot of it is us just trying to take something and emotionally process through it. Because admittedly, if you can take something where everyone looked at you or you felt very isolated and alone and invalidated, and then you make it funny and you get up and you tell your side to an entire room full of people, sort of, and they all agree with you, you're like, I knew I was right. Like, I was not sure.
That's gotta be, I'm not a comic, and I'm never gonna be on a stage in front of anybody, but that's gotta be a pretty powerful feeling, probably.
It really is. I think that's what gets most people. If you love doing it, like one good night and you're hooked, just having that much adoration come back at you, particularly if you had a childhood where you didn't get much, then you're a comic now. And you go seeking it.
So how are you with your kids? Do you give them a lot of adoration?
I do. I think I overly adore children sometimes and hope that doesn't break them. They seem to come out okay. Because I think it's also coupled with, clearly, like looking at the amount of school and stuff I've done, they've definitely had to share me with that. Like there's times where it's been like Mother's Day and they kind of bring me in presents and stuff. And I was in the middle of finals or midterms and had to be like quick hugs, quick thank yous, and back to the books just to finish knocking out studying or papers or reports, doing 2 degrees with kids, and was a lot. Because I had my oldest when I was 19, so I've had kids throughout while doing all of this. I'm kind of glad I had them so young because of that. All this free time now, right?
Yeah. And I have the other, I kind of see people like, oh, well, now you have your free time, quote unquote, and your kids are going to be, they're older. But I had the time, before I had my first child at 30. So then I had that front end. So I think we're balanced. maybe.
Yeah, I think that's probably pretty good, where you still have the energy and, you know, you still have where you're not going to be 80, 70 and still parenting. Hopefully not. That's when I felt bad for my grandmother, because she kind of went from raising all of her kids, having one teenager left in the house, and then she got two more. And like taking us in, she basically started all over again. So by the time we moved out, like they didn't have all that many years, like 20 years without kids, and they were babysitting grandkids throughout that.
Oh, wow.
So I'm like, I don't think they ever got away from it. So now I'm careful about what I say and wish for.
Did you have more appreciation? I know for me, when I had my first son, I felt like I was able to have a lot more appreciation for my parents and to really know what they had to kind of go through just to provide for a child and to have a child and do all that stuff. Did you feel any change towards your parents when you had your kids?
I definitely did. And my oldest, I had preeclampsia that was really bad, like completely out of it. I had to repiece together her birth. I was really, really sick. So there was a period like after I got out of that, and she was in the NICU because she was like 6 weeks early and underweight, and where I just spent like almost a week. I was at the hospital every day, you know, and spend the day at the NICU with my child. And I kind of took a few days processing, and then it was just kind of started to sink in where I started thinking about some of that stuff, like if she wanted to get a body piercing, and I'm going, no, she's perfect. Like, and you're in that early mom thing where you're like, never do that. And my child has a split tongue and tons of tattoos and so many piercings now. I paid for some of them. But at the time it was like, you wouldn't dare to your precious perfect self. And that's when some of that started hitting me, that like I was under 18 when I had my first tattoo, and my mother knew nothing about it till the neighbor told her, and then I got in trouble for it. I was kind of a hellion as a kid. So I had 2 tattoos before the age of 18, crap like that. And I'm going, oh God, if my child ever, and then I think about my mother, or times where I took off and didn't call and let her know where I was for a few days. And all of that would hit me. And I'm like, oh God, I can only imagine what that was like for her. And I did go back and like kind of apologize for like, if I had any idea then what I know now. And I think I have a hard time, like having not had my biological mother, or a mother who was closer to my age and could understand my problems in a reasonable way that wasn't like 1950s. Everyone lives like leave it to be there, which is what grandma wanted for me. She wanted me to be a happy house cleaning, blowjob giving wife, I guess. I was never that girl. I still don't cook. Like I can clean and organize, but if my kids really pull away and don't want to deal with me at all, like it makes me more upset, I think, just by virtue of it's almost just an envy that I try to get when that's happening and like let my shit go as much as I can. But that they wouldn't want to be in my life if I have to do all the work. It's going, all I've ever kind of wanted was to have that bond with my mother, and I never got it. Like, but anytime anyone squanders that, I'm like, how could you squander this when you don't understand what it's like to never have the option? Why would you waste it if it's there? Unless someone was so horrifically abusive, you had to remove them. But like, to me, I just don't quite get that. But I also get, I could be like really being helicoptery to them still. And I'm like, okay, like let it go. It might be just you worrying about stuff from your end so that they have that space in between, I guess.
We'll be right back.
Okay, I gotta be real with you. You know what? I don't want your money, but I made this page and I really want somebody to go look at it. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you a sneak peek to some exclusive videos, some behind the scenes things that are happening on the show, and upcoming guest information. Just visit www.patreon.com/parentlesspodcast and find these little snippets that are going to be available to everyone.
Like with my kids, I've been very open to being honest with them about death, no matter what age they've gone to funerals and things like that. And I remember being a kid and being, told like, well, don't touch their hand. Don't do this. Don't cry. Where I'm like, do whatever you want. Like, so long as it's not crude or crass, like go tuck something in grandpa's pocket, go pat his hand, maybe don't tousle his hair, but within reason. And like, I don't know, I feel like they did a lot better than I did when I was so cut off from that. Like this big severance we do with not letting family like really get those options to say goodbye, or going, oh, kids won't even know. They know. They very much know when entire people they love disappear. Like it'll come up. It just makes more sense to be honest, even if it's packaged in a kid-like way.
Yeah, my kids, I mean, they're around. They hear us talking about this show. They know that my parents are dead. They went to their great grandma's funeral. They saw her. We know they saw her lowered into the ground or the casket. Derek watches forensic shows all the time. Like, so their death and that type of thing is just, they're used to hearing it. And if they never try to kill me in my sleep, then I'm good. like we're good.
Just demystifying most stuff helps with kids. Like they get in less trouble with stuff that's not mystical and forbidden. Like, so not making it mystical or forbidden makes it so that they cope better because they know they can interact and they can ask questions. But if you make it so cloaked in things we don't talk about, they just won't ever feel like they can talk about it is all that happens. Wish I had the magical answers on any of this, but I think when it comes to death, like whatever works for you, works for you. You don't have to grieve. You can forever. Like
that is one thing I like to ask people is, and it's kind of a cheap shot because who really knows like where we're at in the grief cycle or if it ever finishes. I don't think it ever does, but how would you say that you've done so far with your grieving?
I feel like pretty good. I have I almost feel like I should have more emotion around it, or like there's definitely going through stuff and looking at stuff I'll have good memories and kind of miss. But I don't know. I cope with death really rather well, but I think a lot of that has to do with how much of a part of my life it has become over the years between doing autopsies and just trying to do forensics pathology. When I was doing cop stuff, I was aiming for homicide investigation and spent most of my time learning about that type of stuff. That, like, I collect oddities and weird medical stuff. And if there's a body worlds or a death thing, like art display, I'll be there. I have all sorts of books. Like, all of this has kind of helped me come to terms with that a lot. And I think that's part of why people do it is I'm very comfortable if I die. And because of that, I'm also comfortable with other people's death and that it's a natural part of life and that they had their time and that, I'm halfway through mine, I hope, like that I've got another half at least to this.
Right. You've had, your situation kind of thrown in your face since you were little. I mean, literally with kids coming up to you and telling you about it. So you did what you had to do. I mean, I feel like for sure that, you studying death was no accident and doing all these things. That's no accident at all. I mean, that's just.
It set my course in motion.
Yeah.
One of the custom things that I think is really kind of cool is my husband's Seneca, and they basically have interesting kind of cultural practices around it that I've always liked. One of it, it's kind of cute. It's 3 days after someone dies, the whole family basically has a potluck. Starts with very specific soup and bread and such that are custom, and the men eating a bowl, and then everyone kind of dives in. But you have to sit all day and eat the food and basically from sunrise to sunset and share stories about the person, like good, positive, happy, laughing, everyone just telling stories about their life. And you prepare a plate for the deceased person, and then at sunset, you bury it. And once you finish eating, you don't eat again until the next day. That's kind of interesting because it got integrated into my family's practices because of my husband. And the one that I really like that they have is you're only allowed to grieve for, I believe it's like a year or a year and a day type thing. But their custom and belief is if you are grieving really hard and it's taking over your life, you're actually holding the person here and they can't ever quite fully leave. So you get 1 year to grieve it all out. And then you can only think back like in a positive way or looking back at those memories, but you can't be in mourning because they believe that keeps the person here. And I kind of like that because I get where it might be hard. You might a little bit go over this, or maybe a few years go over this, depends. But I like that it kind of gives it this time frame because I feel like we never know if we've done enough or not enough grieving. And not just thinking fondly back of memories and stories, but like mourning where you're really sad. So I don't know. It feels kind of nice almost to have that instruction where if you go a little over, you're like, okay, no, really, you can go wherever now. I'm sorry. Like, but
I do like that. I've never heard of that before. And I do think, yeah, like you said, it gives you some instruction, some guidance as to kind of what you're supposed to do. But then for the poor people who do go over it, I feel like, I mean, maybe they've just got it all together and they're like, 1 year, I'm done. But what if you go over? Then I think you'd feel bad.
Just have them here, then maybe you're kind of needing them here a little longer. Like, I feel like you could justify this to yourself in some way.
So there's some grace.
I'd be fine with that. I'm like, yeah, so you kept him around a little while longer. Probably let him go eventually, though, right? But I think it keeps that motivation on forward movement.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah,
well, and because that's part of their culture and I'm sure that they've been taught to do that. And so they kind of know probably how to get most of the grieving process complete, or not the process completed, but I'm sure that just by, we have our customs and all of that and we know how it works. So I'm sure that just by doing that, they're more accustomed to sticking within that year because that's just how it is.
Well, and there's probably a lot more open resources that a lot of people I see who grieve for a lot longer don't go to therapy or have assistance or don't even know how to begin. Mm-hmm. Sometimes it's just because it's a really close death. I know spouses, like, it'd be rough to wrap in a year, I'm just saying. Or a child be rough to wrap in a year. But imagine because they have a lot more of a communal culture, there's probably a lot more people who are older or younger or of equal age or family members who would want to come during that year and really process with you, being that they're a lot more communicative and familiar. Yeah. I feel like that would help. We don't all get a time to sit and talk about the stuff we've been through. And I think that helps a lot.
Yeah. And in one of my interviews that I did, this guy, he just talked about where his dad, came and he told him and his brother the news. And he said, we just sat there and we hugged it out and we cried. And they just had a real moment of like solidarity and this feeling. And they cried that together, and so And he's like, to this day, I'll give you a hug. I'm a good hugger. And I was like, oh, I think, when my dad died, I don't remember really anybody like giving any hugs or doing anything like that. That just wasn't really like the type of thing that we did. And I don't really care to be hugged today. Like, sometimes it's fine, but if I'm crying, please don't come hug me. Like,
yeah, I can go back and forth, but like, I definitely have moments where I'm like, no, just don't touch me. Leave me alone and let me do my thing. But yeah, I kind of wonder how much of that is just how you healed when you were younger, if it was independent or communal.
I like that. That's a big difference there. Mine was independent, which is why I'm 35 and I'm not really quite sure where I'm at. So that's cool. That's why I like this journey here that I'm on and just talking to other people and hearing everybody's stories. But I would like to know, have you been to therapy?
So much.
Yeah? Tell me about your therapy.
I feel like I've been in and out of therapy since I was probably like 14 or 15, and I was pushing for it before then. So I've done tons and tons and tons of it. But just around general trauma in my life and other trauma, and trauma explodes around me like wild. Not that I'm causing or creating it. It's like proximity, and I had good friends at Columbine and was one town away from Columbine. It just massive shit happens to go down near me or with people I love. That's my plight.
Do you give that disclaimer? Like when you met your husband, did you say, hey man, just so you know?
I kind of let him just step in it and ride it out. Like, it's been decades, so he's kind of used to it by now. Maybe it's bad luck. I have no idea. A curse on my family at one point. I've tried everything from somatic experiencing, ACT, which was acceptance and commitment therapy, DBT, which is dialectical behavioral therapy, CBT with talk therapy. I've done hypnotherapy. So I've kind of dabbled a lot to the point where there's times where I sit and go, maybe I should just go get the master's in psych and just be a therapist. I don't know. I think a lot of that kind of helps on my outlook and ability to deal with it. It's just I kind of just always have someone that I can go in and process the crazy shit with or residual stuff. Though I'd still have to say if anyone's dealing with old trauma and you can't remember much around it, I've heard good things of EMDR, but somatic experiencing is the same. You don't even have to talk. Like, you go in and lay down on a massage table and they cover you in a nice floofy blanket, and under a sheet will put a hand on either kidney. They're basically trying to relax and deactivate your fight or flight. Even for me, how it worked still as a scientist doesn't make sense to me. But I can say it does, which is how I'd heard about it. And they go through and kind of just touch different spots on your head. And if you want to talk about stuff, you do. And if you don't, you don't. But it was based off of trauma that the person basically was a genius who studied how animals cope with trauma right after a near-death experience, where they go and shake and freak out and whatnot, and then they're fine. Like, your dog has a moment of flipping out if he almost gets hit by a car, but then he's like back to tail wagging and good. And something about those touch things, it would feel like I'd go get a massage and I'd have him beat me up, and it never felt relaxing. Like, get all the knots out of my muscles, still would leave not feeling relaxed. I'd leave somatic experiencing feeling so relaxed. Like, I just got a big dose of Valium and a massage. And then someone cut me off and I go right back into a fight or flight lockup thing. And I'm like, damn it, I just paid for this. Like, but if you do it for a while, you'll look back at stuff that's real sensitive from when you're younger. Like, that might be a death or trauma, and you don't have enough information at that age to process through it. You do this, and after a while, you just don't feel all of that intense emotion. You'll feel emotion, just not cranked up like trauma tends to be. And I can't explain how it works. Just one day you're kind of like, I've been doing this a while and it doesn't bother me anymore.
Well, I've never been to a therapist's office, and I don't really expect to be in one. So, but so like, if you were going to give someone advice, that would be the one, you said for trauma a long time ago, right?
Right. Or stuff that you feel like you just can't shake from a long time ago, but you don't want to sit and rehash it all like CBT would do. And there's some schools of thought that say if you do sit and rehash it, you can re-traumatize yourself. It's a way where you don't have to talk. You can, but you don't have to. And I think that's kind of big for stuff when you're a kid, because how do you piece through stuff that you have like just little childlike memories of? Might not be quite enough to help you actually work through it and come to any realizations. So you might be like, I don't know why I still feel bad about this particular death or this particular thing. Because maybe something bad happened and you associate the emotion, but you don't know why.
We'll be right back.
If you like what you've heard so far, tell me about it by sharing the show with your friends, leaving a review, or sharing your story with me. Contact me on Facebook and Instagram at Parentless Podcast, email at parentlesspodcast@gmail.com, or if you'd like to remain anonymous, leave a voicemail at 623-396-6069. Find the show wherever you listen to podcasts.
You said your uncle, he invited you to call him if you wanted to know more about your mom, but that didn't really go well when you did it. Do you feel like, are you going to explore that more?
I am this time I haven't actually set up and asked him. It's more historically when I've tried to get information, it hasn't gone well. So I'm hoping this time, but I feel like we talked kind of just recently and had a big long phone call just in general catching up, just not having talked in a while. So I'll have to try to get with him where he has some free time and make sure I can and I think I need to sit and kind of plan those questions, because I'm like, what all do you ask? I don't want to drive him up a wall, but it's probably just kind of inviting stories more than anything, wanting to know stuff, who she was, not just a rote list of things about her, I guess. I'd like to learn more about my parents and my father, because everyone who's connected to my dad is deceased. So I really don't have anyone to ask. So I'll have to try to see if I can track down anyone. I've always wanted to go back and see if I could at least pick through the case file. I've read the coroner report and stuff like that at my mother, but I've never actually had them dig the case file from the archives in Colorado. And I might have to on my next trip up there, just so I can kind of parse through the case file and see what they saw. I'm like, at least I can figure out what they liked, because if they took pictures all throughout the apartment, at least I could be like, what books did they have from the crime scene photo? What records do they have laying out,
I mean, I feel like you have to with your background and forensic everything. But I mean, wow, to see those to see the whole file. I don't know, but I do feel like you have to.
I think I do. And
Yeah.
I've seen enough autopsy stuff, but it's tough because it's tough to feel connected to my parents because, I mean, they're more a notion than a reality because I was so little. Like, I didn't get to know them. I mean, how well does a baby get to know, you know? How well do you think your 1-year-old knows who you are? You're going, probably not too well.
No. So do you have more memories? I know from when you were 1. So then do you have other, I talked to someone else who had a memory from when she was 2. So do you continue to have memories from when you were really young?
There's definitely a gap in there where I have that memory and then there's a gap, but I can remember my 2nd birthday perfectly and everything thereafter, like, and really well, where I'll describe rooms that I've never seen that other people are familiar with. And they're like, that's it, just from memory. So I feel like the trauma, if anything, might have had me come on board more, or studies that say existential dread as a child actually makes you question a lot more and retain more. So just something you wouldn't want to enact on a child to get them to load up faster. But if it does happen, it can make them ponder that stuff more.
Hey, I was doing you a favor.
Right. Like, I killed Dad for you.
Oh boy. We're starting a whole nother brand of kid here.
I'm going to have to come back on this podcast if I get that like case file.
We listen to like a lot of true crime stuff here. When I was driving to work, I was listening to true crime podcasts, and we watch a lot of things. So that is super interesting. I mean, I guess it's solved, but not officially.
Yeah, that's the thing that I think is really weird, but like I don't think we'd ever have an answer to it, is because like it stayed on the books as, you know, not resolved as a suicide or homicide. But my sister and I would both tell you, oh no, it was a homicide. And that would never hold up in court because we were so little. And I'm going, but I feel like a 3-year-old can be like, yeah, I saw Daddy kill Mommy. And they're probably pretty on point, you know? Mm-hmm. 3-year-old doesn't make that up when there's other stuff afoot, I guess. If it was a different situation, like a suicide, I doubt a 3-year-old would say that just to be funny.
Yeah. And you said that your sister heard it. She didn't see.
Oh, yeah. She could hear the disagreement, the sound. She hasn't gone into any detail of what that was, but the gun blasts, the sounds afterwards, and everything that my dad was saying and doing at the time. And then he walked right out to where she was and sat down, called the cops, cleaned the gun. She, as a child, like anytime there's a helicopter for like the news, or like there were points when I was in elementary school where they'd bring like a helicopter down to just show the kids like what it was like to do traffic reporting, I guess. She would have meltdowns because Flight for Life did come to get my mom, even though they couldn't have saved her. Like her brainstem was, or the back of her head was gone. So all of that stuff that she still remembers pretty well at 3, and it being that traumatic, like, makes sense, but she just doesn't talk about it. It definitely explains her struggles with substances, though. I imagine having that trapped in your head would be just horrific.
Right. Can she hear? I mean, I know in our neighborhood, the helicopters are going a lot. So what about hearing a helicopter now? Is she better with it?
I don't know if we've talked about how she handles it now. Like, that might be part of her addiction issue. I don't know. But as a kid, she'd definitely go into full meltdowns where if there was one that came in really close or was landing nearby, she'd be like, no, Daddy, like staring blankly through nothing while saying stuff like that as a kid. Like it flashed her fully back into it.
Wow. Has she done any therapy?
Off and on. Like, I don't know if she's done nearly as much as I have, but like I remember as a teenager, she definitely did some, and I feel like she's recently re-explored that, but I'm not sure how much in between. We don't share a lot of emotions as families, and that's probably why I just share mine with everybody. I'm like fighting the family tradition of just shutting up and never speaking about your feelings or debts or whatever.
So yeah, sharing your emotions and being, laughing and doing comedy and everything. Do you tend to cry? Do you have those sad emotions that you show people, or you only show people?
I actually kind of tend to hold those more close to the chest for sure. Like where if I'm really sad or cry, like even for me, I'll be jovial and happy all the way up before a funeral. And like the next day, I'll probably look fine, but I'm going to melt down during the ceremony at some point, probably. And if not, either way, it's usually the night before or the night after, or both, where I'm like just in a puddle somewhere and like, leave me alone, I need a ball. Or I'll throw on movies, like I'll throw on The Divine Secrets of the Yaya Sisterhood and make myself Bloody Marys to process stuff about my mom, because then I can cry and drink and like, but I'm like, no, it's the movie. I'm not actually this emotionally involved in my life. Like, but it's just a big excuse for me to process shit like that.
So do you do that currently? I mean, sometimes?
Oh, yeah. It's still even, I haven't done it in a while, but like a year. But I'm like, yeah, it's about time to drink Bloody Marys and watch the Yaya Sisterhood again.
Right.
But it ends on a good note, and I feel like I was cleansed, I guess.
Yeah, that's important, I think.
So, see, I'm still cheating. I'm probably keeping her here like Polly. It's been years. I need to stop grieving.
How can we find you if we would like to hear any of your work?
My Instagram is probably the easiest way to find me, which is Amber Webster 623. And I'm Amber Webster on Facebook as well. I think it's Broken Serif if you're plugging in the full facebook.com/ will get you to my page as well.
Okay. Well, Amber, thanks so much for stopping in. And
thank you for having me.
Yes, I'm I'm your Facebook friend now, and I've really been enjoying your posts. So,
well, thank you. I need to put more public out there for people to see. I think there's a decent amount of political out there right now, but nothing too crazy.
All right. Well, I'm going to end it here. We've got an hour and 45. So thank you so much for your time and for your insights, for sure.
And thank you. And thank you for having me again. Like, this has been a lot of fun.
Yes. All right. Talk to you later.
Talk to you later. Have a good day.
Bye. You too.
Empty faces, covered in cars, spreading fake skin, passing me by.
Parentless is recorded in Phoenix, Arizona. Find us on social media and any podcast platform. Music provided by Colin the Coco and the Revolving Birds. Studio provided by Fat Kid Productions. Check out one of the many shows available on our network. I'm your host, Stephanie Relaford. Thank you for listening to Parentless.